The stage lights dimmed, and the applause faded into the background. In the quiet, dark room, one figure stood motionless, holding the microphone tightly, her eyes staring at the fading memories. It was the moment of collapse, a shock without words. As the audience continued to bask in the emotions of the performance, Ana Gabriel, a legendary voice in Latin music, realized something she had been avoiding for years: the painful truth about the price one pays for standing in the spotlight. Behind the glitz and glamour, behind the smiles and accolades, there are shadows few ever talk about. The rumors, the secret glances, the moments of tension behind the scenes. Ana Gabriel, with her raspy voice and no-nonsense attitude, had to face something that no one expects: the betrayal from those closest to her. But this betrayal did not come from just anyone. It came from other stars, the very ones she had once considered friends. It all happened during a major concert, where the stars glittered under the spotlight. Among them was one name that shattered not just the atmosphere, but the quiet that Ana had worked so hard to build throughout her career. It wasn't about the music. It was about a comment, a shift in the way things were done, and a look that was never spoken. Ana Gabriel, the resilient woman on stage, had to confront something that no one could have prepared her for: a silent war between colleagues, stars she had once trusted. It wasn't a public argument, but a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the air. At first, Ana didn't realize it. She had always been focused on the music, on the performance. But as the years went by, the differences between her and some of the people around her started to become clearer. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about respect, and the lack of it. That moment, on that fateful night at a major event in Mexico, wasn't a loud confrontation. It was a quiet tension, a silent betrayal that Ana could feel but couldn't immediately explain. It wasn't the audience that noticed it, nor the cameras that captured it, but she did. The unspoken words, the insincere smiles, the coldness in the air, everything that should have been a celebration turned into an uncomfortable, unsaid rift. The camera would never catch the weight of that look, but Ana felt it as if it had pierced her soul. What happened to Ana Gabriel, the woman who had once been adored by millions? She had been a shining star in Latin music, and now she was a woman standing alone in the spotlight, realizing that something had been lost, something beyond the stage. Was this just a passing shock, or was it the end of an era? Ana Gabriel had once been the name on everyone's lips, the voice that moved hearts, the woman who captured the very essence of love and pain in her songs. From her raspy voice to her candid attitude, she was the epitome of authenticity in a world that often demanded perfection. But fame, as it often does, has its way of deceiving. What appeared to be glittering success, full of admiration and adoration, was, in reality, a complex web of contradictions, tensions, and unspoken rivalries. And Ana, despite her towering stature, was no exception. Her career had been marked by moments of pure brilliance, where her songs echoed through the hearts of millions. But with that success came a responsibility, one that she had not asked for but had been thrust upon her. As a public figure, she was not only expected to deliver perfect performances, but also to maintain an image of being untouchable, flawless, and invincible. For years, Ana embraced the limelight, basking in the love of her fans and the applause of the crowd. But in the shadows, a storm was brewing, one that would soon threaten to destroy everything she had worked for. In 2002, Ana was at the peak of her career, her tours selling out across the globe, her name a household staple in Latin music. She was a star, a true icon. Yet, as she walked the red carpets and performed to sold-out arenas, something inside her was slowly changing. The pressure was mounting, the expectations growing heavier by the day. And within the industry, where egos clashed just as fiercely as the voices did, Ana began to notice cracks in her world. It wasn't the fans who were beginning to let her down. It wasn't the critics either. It was the people she had once called colleagues, friends, and equals. In an industry dominated by fleeting friendships and hidden rivalries, The truth about those closest to her was far darker than Ana had ever imagined. One of the earliest moments of realization came during an event at the Auditorio Nacional in Mexico City, a monumental concert meant to showcase the best of Latin music. The night was supposed to be a celebration of unity among the stars, a coming together of powerful female voices in a rare moment of collaboration. But what started as a grand, harmonious affair soon turned into a battle of egos. Ana Gabriel found herself standing on the edge of a precipice, her trust in her fellow performers slipping away. Lucia Mendez, a renowned singer in her own right, was supposed to be a partner in the performance. But from the moment they met backstage, Ana could feel a tension in the air. Lucia, who had been absent from the music scene for years, was attempting a comeback. And while she had every right to do so, Ana could sense a subtle arrogance in her behavior, a desire to dominate the stage that was both unspoken and undeniable. The rehearsals were tense. Lucia insisted on changing the order of appearances, questioning the set list, and suggesting adjustments to the lighting and the staging. She even demanded that her performance of Mujer contra Mujer, a classic duet, be filmed separately from the rest of the artists. To Ana, this was a clear sign of desperation, a need to control the situation and place herself in the spotlight. But it wasn't just the rehearsals that disturbed Ana. After one of the sessions, Lucia made a comment, one that Ana would never forget. According to a backstage assistant, Lucia remarked that Ana's style of singing, her powerful, emotional delivery, was too much. "She just screams," Lucia had said. "She confuses power with emotion." Those words stung. For Ana, singing was not just a craft. It was an extension of herself. It was how she poured her soul into every note, every lyric. To be told that her passion was just screaming was a personal attack, a strike at the very heart of her artistry. Ana didn't respond publicly. She remained composed, as she always did. But deep down, the damage had been done. The respect she had once extended to Lucia had been shattered. Days later, Ana withdrew from a joint appearance they were supposed to do, citing her refusal to share the stage with masks. The comment, subtle yet piercing, would mark the beginning of an irreversible rift. In the years that followed, the media tried to mend the broken relationship, suggesting that it was all just a misunderstanding. But for Ana, it wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was about respect, something she had given freely to others but had found lacking in her relationships within the industry. Lucia, in turn, denied there was any conflict, even as the music world knew the truth. There would be no reconciliation, no coming together. Ana Gabriel had learned a painful lesson. In the music industry, as in life, respect was not something you could demand. It had to be earned. And once it was lost, it was nearly impossible to regain. It wasn't just Lucia who disappointed Ana. Other names in the industry, Yuri, Dulce, and even Veronica Castro, would also make their mark on Ana's list of betrayals. But for Ana, the pain of betrayal was not about the public spectacle of it all. It was about the quiet moments, the unspoken words, the subtle slights, the broken promises. She would no longer share a stage with those who couldn't respect her art, her integrity, or her truth. The music business, for all its glitter and glamour, had revealed its darker side to Ana Gabriel, and she would never forget what she had learned. The turning point in Ana Gabriel's career came not from a sudden scandal, nor from an overnight collapse. It came from something far more insidious, a quiet unraveling. The conflict that would eventually reshape her journey was not a public spectacle, but a gradual erosion of trust, respect, and, most painfully, her very essence as an artist. Ana had always been a fierce protector of her art. For her, music was not just a profession, it was the most vulnerable part of herself. When she stood on stage, every note she sang was a reflection of her soul, raw and unfiltered. She poured everything into her performances, into her songs. It was a way for her to connect with her audience, to convey emotions too deep for words. And yet, despite the adoration of millions, there were those who sought to tear her down, not out of malice, but out of their own insecurities and egos. For Ana, it was the subtle betrayals, the whispered criticisms, and the moments of silent judgment that hurt the most. In 2002, Ana was riding high on the success of her career. Her tours were sold out across the globe, and she had become an icon in Latin music. But even as she stood at the pinnacle of her fame, she felt the weight of her success pressing down on her. There were moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if the price of her fame had been too high. She had sacrificed so much for her career, but at what cost? The first real crack in the facade came during a special performance at the Auditorio Nacional in Mexico City. It was meant to be a celebration of the greatest female voices in Latin music, a rare opportunity for the industry's leading women to come together and share the stage. But Ana quickly realized that what was meant to be a unifying moment would, in fact, expose the growing tensions in the industry. Lucia Mendez, a well-known Mexican singer, was also slated to perform at the event. Lucia had been away from the music scene for a few years, but she was attempting to make a comeback. Ana, always the professional, welcomed her with open arms. However, the rehearsals soon revealed the underlying issues that would come to define their relationship, or lack thereof. From a start, there was something off about the way Lucia behaved. During rehearsals, she was insistent on changing the order of performances, adjusting the lighting, and even questioning the set list. She wanted control over every aspect of the show. But it wasn't just about the technicalities. Lucia's attitude during the rehearsals spoke volumes to Ana. Lucia's desire to dominate the stage, her insistence on being the center of attention, was more than Ana could tolerate. What should have been a collective performance soon turned into a competition for the spotlight. Ana, ever the professional, remained silent, but the strain was palpable. When it came time for the collaborative performance of Mujer contra Mujer, Lucia insisted on performing her part separately from the rest of the group. The justification was that she wanted to give the song its proper emotional weight. But to Ana, it seemed like an excuse to draw attention to herself. What was once a gesture of unity on stage now felt like a selfish grab for individual recognition. The breaking point came not in front of the cameras, but behind the scenes. A comment made by Lucia, overheard by a backstage assistant, struck Ana to her core. Lucia had complained about Ana's vocal style, saying that she screamed too much and confused power with emotion. For someone who had built a career on pouring every ounce of her heart into her performances, this was not just a critique of her voice, it was an attack on everything that defined her as an artist. Ana didn't respond immediately. She didn't lash out or make a scene. Instead, she withdrew into herself. The following days were marked by silence and an unspoken tension that could be felt by everyone involved. Ana knew that something fundamental had shifted. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine. The respect she had extended to Lucia and to others in the industry had been shattered. The truth was clear. The world she had once believed in, the world of music and artistry, was not as pure as she had imagined. The decision to cancel her participation in a joint performance with Lucia was a painful one, but it was also a necessary one. Ana had always been someone who believed in integrity. For her, music was about honesty, about putting your soul into every note, every word. And Lucia, with her manipulative behavior and lack of respect for Ana's artistry, had shown her a side of the music world that Ana could no longer ignore. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about the people, the relationships, and the values that defined her. In the aftermath of the incident, the media tried to create a narrative of reconciliation, as they always did. They tried to suggest that it was just a misunderstanding, that Ana had overreacted. But Ana knew better. She had seen the cracks in the facade, and she knew that once respect was lost, it was impossible to get it back. Lucia, for her part, denied any tension, claiming that she had no issues with Ana. But in the world of music, as in life, action spoke louder than words. Ana's decision to cut ties with Lucia Mendez was not just a personal choice. It was a statement. It was a declaration that she would no longer tolerate betrayal, no longer allow herself to be manipulated for the sake of someone else's ego. But it was also the moment when Ana Gabriel stopped being just a performer and became a woman who knew her worth. She had learned the hard way that in the world of music and in life, respect wasn't something you could demand. It was something that had to be earned. Ana Gabriel's decision to step back from those relationships was not born out of bitterness, but out of a need to protect her own integrity, to preserve what little of herself remained untouched by the cynicism of the industry. But there was something deeper in her psyche that she had never fully acknowledged until that moment. The roots of her resilience and her silence, the reasons why she had chosen to endure so much without ever fully fighting back. It was a reflection of her childhood, of her family, and of the values that had been instilled in her long before the stage lights had ever been turned on. Anna's journey back to her origins wasn't just a matter of reflection. It was a profound understanding of who she was and why she had chosen the path she did. Born in a small town in Mexico, Ana was raised by a family whose love for music ran deep, but whose financial struggles were a constant reminder of the harsh realities of life. The Gabriel family wasn't wealthy in material terms, but they were rich in love, in resilience, and in the shared belief that family came first. Music was a way for them to survive the hardships, to find solace in something that transcended their immediate world of struggle and deprivation. Her mother, in particular, was a woman who taught Ana the importance of strength in the face of adversity. She had seen her share of hardships, from losing loved ones to dealing with the everyday difficulties of raising children on her own. But through it all, she maintained a quiet dignity, never raising her voice, never giving in to the weight of the world. It was a lesson Ana carried with her throughout her life, a lesson that would later become both a strength and a burden. For Ana, to speak out, to confront those who betrayed her, was a difficult decision. It wasn't something she took lightly, because in her upbringing, there was always a sense of stoicism, of suffering in silence, of bearing the burden without complaint. But as she stood on the precipice of her career, Ana realized that the values instilled in her by her mother, the ones that had served her so well in her early life, were now holding her back. The world she had entered, the world of fame and success, was not kind to those who kept silent, to those who didn't fight for what they believed in. Yet, despite all of her success, despite the millions of records sold and the adoration from fans, Ana had always felt an undercurrent of something missing, a gap between who she was as an artist and who she had to be to survive in the industry. Ana's struggle with this gap had been lifelong. She had spent her entire career trying to reconcile the woman her family had raised her to be, the quiet, dignified woman who never sought the spotlight, with the performer who was expected to entertain, to be larger than life. For years, Ana had suppressed her inner turmoil, burying it beneath the weight of her performances and the expectations of others. But the moment with Lucia Mendez, the betrayal by someone she had trusted, had cracked that facade wide open. It forced Ana to look inward and confront the woman she had become, not the woman she had been taught to be. Her childhood had been filled with lessons of patience and endurance, but it was also filled with an understanding of how to protect herself. Her mother had never complained, never cried out for help, but Ana knew that wasn't always the healthiest way to live. As a child, she had learned to hold her emotions close, to control them, to ensure that no one could use her vulnerability against her. But as an adult, Ana found that holding onto those emotions only made them fester. The music industry, with its demands and its relentless pursuit of perfection, didn't allow room for silence, for hesitation, or for vulnerability. And yet, it was precisely those qualities that had kept her grounded, that had made her unique in the sea of stars that populated the world of entertainment. The pressure to perform, to be something she wasn't, had always been there, but it was never more apparent than in the aftermath of the failed collaboration with Lucia. Ana's reaction, her decision to withdraw, wasn't just about one incident. It was about a lifetime of navigating a world that demanded she be both a star and a person, two identities that rarely aligned. It was a world that asked her to fit into molds that didn't match the woman she had been raised to be. The disconnect between the two was painful, and it was only through this betrayal that Ana realized how much she had been forced to compromise over the years. Her decision to remain silent for so long, to endure the insults, the betrayals, and the disappointments, was not born out of weakness, as some might have thought. It was a reflection of the strength she had learned from her mother and her upbringing. But silence, Ana realized, was no longer enough. She couldn't continue to live in that space of quiet suffering, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. The weight of her career, the weight of her reputation, was too much to bear alone. Ana's decision to confront the truth, to speak out about the betrayals and the lies, was a turning point. It was a recognition that she could no longer live for others, that she had to reclaim her own narrative. The pain she had felt, the disappointment, the sense of betrayal, these were not weaknesses to hide. They were part of who she was, part of the story that she had to tell. And for the first time in her career, Ana Gabriel allowed herself to be honest, to confront the very forces that had shaped her, for better or for worse. The consequences of Ana Gabriel's choice to speak out and remove herself from toxic relationships were not immediate. Unlike the glamorous facades of the entertainment industry that often celebrated quick success and rapid comebacks, Ana's journey of self-realization was slow and insidious. The damage caused by years of enduring betrayal, backhanded compliments, and a gnawing feeling of being misunderstood would take its toll over time. And it wasn't just in the form of public feuds or headline scandals. It was far deeper than that, woven into her relationships, her mental health, her spirit. As Ana withdrew from the spotlight, the consequences began to manifest in ways that she could no longer ignore. The media, ever eager for a story, tried to spin her silence into an enigma. The public wondered what had happened to the woman who had once been so open, so approachable, so candid. For years, she had given them everything: her music, her soul, her vulnerability. But now, the world was faced with a woman who had decided to protect herself, perhaps too much. She had cut off the flow of her emotions and locked them away. And it wasn't just the media's interpretation of her silence that stung. It was the disconnection she felt from those closest to her. Her fans, the very people who had supported her throughout the years, seemed to grow restless. They missed her, but they didn't understand why she had pulled back. They wondered why the woman who had once seemed so invincible was now hidden behind the wall she had constructed. Ana had always prided herself on being open, but in this new phase of her life, she had closed off her vulnerability in order to survive. It was a survival tactic, but it came at a price. The emotional weight of these changes was heavy. It wasn't just the public's reaction to her absence. It was the quiet moments, the interactions with the people who had been a part of her life for decades. Her relationships with family members and close friends, too, began to feel strained. Ana had spent so many years protecting herself, hiding behind her music, that she had lost touch with the people who had once been her emotional lifeline. She had buried her feelings for so long that she no longer knew how to express them properly. The most visible consequences of her emotional withdrawal, however, were in her professional life. While her fans may have continued to buy her records and attend her concerts, the industry had changed. Ana was no longer the young, fresh voice that had burst onto the scene decades ago. The demands of the music industry had evolved, and with it, the type of artist that was celebrated. Ana, however, was not easily swayed. She refused to compromise her authenticity for the sake of staying relevant. The industry around her, though, was not so forgiving. Music, like fashion, is cyclical. Trends come and go, and the spotlight can shift just as quickly as it appears. Ana Gabriel's decision to protect her integrity by not conforming to the industry's ever-changing demands meant that her relevance was now at the mercy of an industry that no longer saw her as the it artist. The pressure to conform to the whims of the market, to adapt to what was trendy, was immense. But Ana refused to sell out. She refused to give up what made her unique. As her contemporaries adapted and became more marketable, Ana held fast to her core principles, even though it meant that she was no longer as commercially successful as she had once been. The toll this took on her personal life was undeniable. With each passing year, the feeling of isolation grew stronger. Her peers in the industry, some of whom had once praised her, now saw her as an outcast. The very people she had once respected, the artists she had shared stages with, no longer understood her. They had moved on, evolving with the times, while Ana remained steadfast in her refusal to change her voice, her style, or her values. And then there were the financial consequences. Despite the enduring popularity of her music, the record sales and concert ticket revenues dwindled. The industry had shifted to accommodate new styles, new voices, and Ana Gabriel was no longer at the forefront. While her music remained timeless, the commercial success she once enjoyed was a distant memory. The reality of the changing landscape was painful for someone who had once been at the top of her game. Ana had become a symbol of authenticity in a world that prized commercial success above all else. But even authenticity has its cost. Yet, despite all of this, Ana refused to bend. Her sense of self, however battered, remained intact. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about living in accordance with her values. She had chosen the path of integrity, even though it meant losing everything else. As she stood in front of her mirror at the end of every long day, she would ask herself if it was worth it. The answer was always the same. It was. But what did worth it truly mean in the end? Was it worth the loneliness that came with cutting herself off from those who had once been her closest allies? Was it worth the financial struggles that followed? The reality that she was no longer the star everyone once adored? Ana could no longer answer that question definitively. She had lived through years of internal conflict, and there were days when she wasn't sure if the sacrifices had been worth it. But what she did know was that, through it all, she had remained true to herself. And for Ana Gabriel, that was something that no amount of fame or fortune could ever take away. The consequences of her choices were far-reaching, extending into every aspect of her life. But as she reflected on everything that had happened, she found herself realizing something. Even in the midst of pain, betrayal, and loss, she had built something that was her own. It was raw, unpolished, and imperfect, but it was hers. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The time came when Ana Gabriel could no longer avoid facing the full extent of the consequences of her choices. It wasn't an event of drama or grand spectacle. It wasn't a public meltdown or a scandalous confrontation. It was simply a moment of realization, a quiet confrontation with the reality she had been avoiding for so long. She had spent years hiding behind her music, behind the image of a woman who stood strong in the face of adversity. But now, there was no escaping the truth any longer. The weight of the years of silence, the self-imposed isolation, had become too much for her to bear. The external pressures had been mounting, but it was the internal battle that had worn her down. Ana had always been strong, but there was a certain exhaustion that came with the constant need to fight, to defend her art, her integrity, her very self. She had fought for so long to protect her authenticity, but in the process, she had alienated herself from the very people who had once been her greatest support. The event that forced her to confront this reality was, ironically, a simple invitation to a gathering, a celebration of the legacy of Latin music. It wasn't a glamorous affair, nor was it a major event in the public eye. It was more of a private gathering, one of those moments where the artists who had once been icons could meet and reminisce about the glory days of their youth. For Ana, however, it became something far more significant than she could have ever anticipated. At first, she hesitated. She had spent years avoiding these types of events, choosing instead to stay out of the spotlight and avoid the awkward interactions with old colleagues, former friends, and peers who had become distant, some due to betrayal, others simply because time and circumstances had changed. The music world was no longer the place she had entered with such hope and passion all those years ago. It had become a business, a place where authenticity was often sacrificed for fame and profit. But as Ana stood there, staring at the invitation, she realized something had shifted within her. Perhaps it was age, Or perhaps it was simply the accumulated weight of years of isolation. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of something she had long forgotten. The desire to reconnect, to bridge the gap between herself and the world she had withdrawn from. And so, Ana decided to go. She chose to step out from the shadows, to face the reality of the industry that had both made her and betrayed her. It wasn't an easy decision. She knew it would force her to confront everything she had been running from. The betrayals, the misunderstandings, the wounds that had never fully healed. But it was a decision she felt she had to make. For once, she needed to stop hiding. She needed to be present, to face the people she had once shared stages with, to look into their eyes and see whether there was still room for reconciliation or whether the chasm between them had become too wide to cross. The night of the event arrived, and Ana stood in front of the mirror, feeling the weight of the years on her shoulders. She wasn't the same woman who had entered the industry all those years ago, full of hope and dreams. The years had worn her down, shaped her into someone more guarded, more wary of the world. But still, there was something in her eyes, something that had survived, something that refused to be extinguished. As she walked into the venue, she could feel the familiar tension in the air. The room was filled with familiar faces, some of them friends, others mere acquaintances from years past. Some smiled at her, others avoided eye contact, and a few gave her nods of acknowledgement. Ana stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The music industry had changed, but so had she. She was no longer the naive young woman who had come into the business with nothing but passion and dreams. She was a survivor, someone who had learned the hard way that trust was something that had to be earned, not freely given. She had learned that the music industry, despite all its glitter, could be a cold and ruthless place. But she had also learned something more important: the power of self-respect, the importance of staying true to herself, no matter the cost. As the night wore on, Ana found herself in conversations with old colleagues. Some had moved on, some were still struggling, and a few had fallen from grace entirely. But there was one thing they all shared: a sense of weariness, a sense that the price of fame had been too high. Many of them had sacrificed their authenticity for success, for the approval of the public and the industry. And in that moment, Ana realized that she had made the right choice all along. The pain, the betrayals, the sacrifices, they had all led her to this point. And though the road had been difficult, it had been her road. At one point during the evening, a former colleague approached her. It was Lucia Mendez, the woman with whom Ana had once shared such a tense history. Lucia smiled, a forced, somewhat awkward smile, and extended her hand. Ana hesitated for a moment, and then, with a deep breath, took her hand. They exchanged a few words, but neither of them spoke about the past. There was no need to. The silence spoke volumes. They both knew what had transpired, but neither was willing to acknowledge it outright. Instead, they shared a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement that the past was the past, and that there was nothing more to be gained from rehashing old wounds. As the evening came to a close, Ana left the event with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The tension that had once weighed heavily on her shoulders had begun to lift, but she knew that it would never fully disappear. The industry, her relationships, her career, they had all been shaped by forces beyond her control. But Ana had learned that she could choose her own path, that she didn't have to live for anyone else's approval. She didn't have to conform to the industry's expectations, to the whims of others. She had lived through the worst of it, and now she was free to be herself, on her own terms. Ana Gabriel had spent most of her career quietly enduring, absorbing the betrayals and unspoken grievances, her silence often speaking louder than any words ever could. It wasn't that she hadn't wanted to speak out. It was more that she had learned, over the years, that silence often carried more weight than confrontation. But as the years went on, as the betrayals piled up and the fractures in her relationships grew deeper, Ana realized that silence could only shield her for so long. The weight of it all had begun to take its toll, and there was no escaping the reality that had been building for so many years. The moment of change came when Ana was asked, in an interview, about her feelings toward the people who had betrayed her, about the musicians and colleagues who had broken her trust, about the moments when she had been forced to stand alone. For the first time, Ana felt the familiar walls of silence begin to crumble. She had spent so many years internalizing her pain, hiding it behind her music and the persona she had created. But now, in front of the camera, she was being asked to confront that pain. She could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her as she sat there, thinking about everything that had happened, the betrayals, the quiet struggles, the years of silence. It wasn't easy for Ana to speak these words. She had always prided herself on being strong, on holding it all together, on not letting the world see her weaknesses. But in that moment, she understood that strength was not about keeping everything inside. It was about facing the truth even when it hurt. And so, with a quiet breath, she spoke her truth. "I've lived through a lot," Ana said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And there were moments when I thought I would never find my way back. But I've learned that you can't keep everything inside. You can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not. It doesn't make you weak to admit when you've been hurt. It doesn't make you weak to let go of the things that no longer serve you." Her words, though simple, were profound. They were a confession, not of guilt, but of acceptance. Ana had spent years in a constant state of tension, always wondering if she was strong enough, if she was doing the right thing by remaining silent. But now she knew. Strength wasn't about enduring without end. It was about acknowledging the pain, understanding it, and choosing to move forward. Ana spoke of the betrayals she had suffered, not as a way to accuse, but as a way to free herself from the burden of silence. She admitted that there were people she had trusted who had turned their backs on her, who had used her for their own gain. But she also spoke of the moments of kindness, the people who had truly supported her, the friends who had stood by her through all. And in doing so, Ana wasn't just confronting the past, she was also acknowledging the strength that had allowed her to endure it. Her confession was not dramatic or filled with anger. It was measured, introspective, and filled with a quiet wisdom that only came from years of experience. She wasn't looking for sympathy, nor was she trying to provoke a reaction from her audience. Ana Gabriel had simply come to a place of peace with her past. She had come to understand that her journey, with all its ups and downs, had shaped her into the woman she had become. And in that moment, she realized that she didn't need to carry the weight of all those old wounds any longer. She could forgive, not for the sake of others, but for her own peace of mind. It was a turning point. The quiet, reserved woman who had spent years in the shadows of her own emotions had finally found her voice. And with that voice, Ana was able to let go of the hurt, the bitterness, and the anger that had held her captive for so long. She wasn't looking for closure from others. She was giving herself the closure she had needed all along. Her decision to speak out, to finally acknowledge the emotional scar she had carried for years, was not an easy one. It was a painful, but necessary, step in her journey toward healing. Ana had always been an artist, someone who expressed herself through her music. But now, she was learning to express herself in new ways, by speaking her truth, by standing tall in the face of her own vulnerability. And as she sat there, speaking to the world, Ana realized that her journey wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about the woman she had become. She had spent years battling her own doubts, her own fears, and now she was finally allowing herself to heal. She wasn't waiting for someone else to validate her. She was validating herself. She had earned the right to speak her truth, and she would no longer hide from it. For Ana, the road ahead was still uncertain. There would always be challenges, always be moments of doubt. But she had finally reached a place of acceptance, and that acceptance was the key to her freedom. She didn't need to apologize for the choices she had made, nor did she need to explain herself to anyone. Ana Gabriel had earned her place in the world, and no one could take that away from her. Her words, though simple, carried a profound weight. They were a reminder that no matter how much the world may change, no matter how much we may lose, there's always the possibility of redemption. There's always the chance to begin again, to reclaim what was once lost. And for Ana Gabriel, this moment was her new beginning. As the years passed, Ana Gabriel's legacy became more than just a collection of hit songs and sold-out concerts. It became a story of resilience, of overcoming the kind of personal betrayal that could break anyone, and of finding a way to reclaim one's identity in a world that often demands conformity. She had spent much of her life in the shadows, quietly enduring the pressures of fame and the weight of expectations. But through it all, Ana had never lost sight of who she was, an artist, a woman, someone who understood that the truest form of strength wasn't found in silence, but in the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Yet, as Ana reflected on her journey, there remained an unspoken question, one that lingered in the back of her mind, a question that had no easy answer. Was it all worth it? Was the cost of maintaining her authenticity, of staying true to herself, worth the years of isolation, of battling an industry that had, at times, seemed more interested in spectacle than in substance? In her quiet moments, Ana couldn't help but wonder if things could have been different. What if she had been more vocal, more confrontational in those earlier years? What if she had stood up for herself sooner, had demanded the respect she deserved before the betrayals had piled up? But those thoughts, though natural, were no longer as consuming. Ana had come to realize that the road she had walked, with all its ups and downs, was hers to own. There was no use in dwelling on what-ifs, because the life she had lived had shaped her into the woman she had become. The industry had changed, too. The rise of social media and the increasing demands for instant fame and viral moments had created a new generation of stars, artists who were more focused on trends than authenticity. The music world Ana had entered, the one that had valued talent, hard work, and integrity, had evolved into something more superficial, more fleeting. For some, that was a choice they willingly embraced. For Ana, however, it was a reality she could never quite accept. She often found herself reflecting on the younger generation of artists who had come after her, wondering if they understood the sacrifices that came with true fame, or if they, too, would one day find themselves facing the same question she had. Were they aware of the personal toll that constant attention, constant scrutiny could have on a person? Did they understand the cost of losing oneself in the pursuit of success? But Ana knew that her story was her own, and that the lessons she had learned were not lessons everyone needed to learn the hard way. Her path was a unique one, shaped by her own choices, her own triumphs, and her own failures. The question, was it worth it, would never have a definitive answer. There are moments of joy, of pure artistic expression, and moments of deep pain and loss. The balance between the two had shaped her entire life. The final lesson Ana Gabriel had come to learn was the importance of peace. She had spent so many years fighting, defending, and protecting herself from a world that had once seemed so welcoming. Now, at this stage in her life, she had come to understand that peace didn't come from external validation or from the applause of the crowd. It came from within. It came from accepting the imperfections of life, of letting go of past grudges, and of finding a way to embrace who she was, flaws and all. As the music faded in the background, and the world moved on to its next headline, Ana Gabriel stood still, at peace with her past. The question of whether it was all worth it no longer mattered. She had lived her truth, and in doing so, had found a deeper connection to herself than any success or recognition could ever provide. In the end, the legacy Ana Gabriel left behind wasn't just in the songs she sang, but in the strength she showed through the hardest moments of her life. It was in the quiet acceptance of her own journey and the understanding that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. And so, as the years continued to pass, Ana Gabriel's story remained, not as a tale of fame or fortune, but as a reminder to all who listen to her music. The true power of an artist lies not in their ability to entertain, but in their capacity to stay true to themselves, no matter the cost.